Hello, come on in. Welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. Early Monday morning edition on this fine sunny October day, 2023. And I'm surveying my latest haul of scrap metal. Like the thumbnail says, this is a NASCAR ARCA Ilmor 396. It's what it's called. Ilmor, I-L-M-O-R, engineering. Originally, and they probably still do, build Formula One and IndyCar engines and boat engines, etc. They're an engine manufacturer of exotic stuff. And around 2015, the ARCA series, if you watch that, we're trying to make it, believe it or not when I tell you the numbers, more affordable for race teams. At that point, most all your teams, you got the haves and the have-nots, your big and little teams, even in that ARCA, all running the 358 cubic inch version of, a hand-me-down NASCAR engine from the Cup Series on down. Or if you were a really affluent team, you might have your own engine program. If you don't, you're probably leasing an engine for a lot of money. So ARCA's idea was, they've tried it in the past, but to have a spec engine, in this case, the Ilmor 396. It's LS based. It was non-brand associated, if you will. I guess when I understand, the GM teams ran the Chevrolet or GM Performance block, and everybody else ran a Dart block, like this one behind me. The deal was, the engine itself initially was $35,000. It went back to Ilmor, and the race teams owned it. So they actually have a property, if you will. Instead of, if you lease an engine, you just ferry it back and forth, and you don't have any investment. You don't have any equity in it. So in this case, you own the engine, but it has to go back to Ilmor for overhaul every 12 to 1,500 miles. So whatever that turns out, 3 or 4 races. And you probably have more than one. And it's fuel injected. It had Holley fuel injection, still does. They still run them. And the horsepower for whatever track you're going to race at is all NASCAR and Ilmor. They just download the power for the race teams, and that's what you get. It's conservatively rated at 700 horsepower, 530 foot-pounds of torque, but of course that would vary track to track. It literally came, I have the wiring harness, it has a big round connector that would screw into the firewall, you set it in, you connect it, and it runs. Pretty interesting. After the 12 to 1,500 miles, it goes back to Ilmor, and the owner is responsible for the rebuild, $10,000 to $15,000. Now this sounds really expensive to a guy like me, but if you're a big race team, this is probably affordable. And they were successful right off the bat. For the first few years of ARCA, they dominated pretty much. And I don't know, I'm not up on the rules if you can still run a built engine compared to a spec engine. Built being means you built it yourself or had whatever, the original program. And the same scenario with the same engine took over in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, and they call it the NT engine, basically the same Ilmor 396, and that's basically the skinny on it. Now, so anyway, so it goes back for overhaul, whatever it needs, you got to pay for. It is written, when I bought this block from the guy, that Ilmor charges the race team when it needs, for instance, this block, $10,000 for that block, all machined, ready to go. And I'm not surprised, which this stuff is outer-worldly for basically a junkyard LS guy. It's no longer suitable, everything you're looking at for a, race team you're going to see on television, but for your average guy on the street, this is, some pretty exotic stuff. Which it is. You have to, and if I do anything with it, which I plan on, the wheels are already turning, you have to determine what you have and what you're going to do with it. So The bore on this is 4.185. That's big for an LS. That's what this block is currently at, and that's as big as the rules would allow in ARCA. This is an ARCA block, from what I gather. It has a number, ACE ARCA control engine. This is number 179. I read an article where they celebrated the 200th engine, so this was slightly before that. I could look up approximately what year. And it says this particular block has 2,166.8 miles. That's some pretty accurate record keeping. And it was rejected because it says the cylinder bores are rusty. I look at them and they got a perfect crosshatch. And yeah, there's some staining there, but again, I'm looking at it from the eyes of a junkyard LS rebuilder, or maybe slightly higher than that. I'm not sloppy, but you know, I'm looking at it with an eye for the economy of it. So it was rejected, and when I went to get it, I mean, there's a warehouse full of them. Earlier last summer, my buddy Charlie bought a whole package with the Dot Pro 1 12-degree heads, brand new in the box, I think. So he got an awesome deal. We chose, for him, he wanted the GM Performance block, and that was my intent. I traded for this stuff on Saturday, so I'm into it right-ish. Looking through all the blocks, a lot of them, they have the bell housing there too, and the starter is on the bell housing in a ARCA or a Craftsman truck series truck. So a lot of them, the outer starter bolt hole was cut right off. You're not going to save a lot of weight there, but they did. So you have to be careful when you're shopping for a block. I'm on my hands and knees in a dirty warehouse. Well, it's not that dirty, but I came home with my knees dirty. Looking for a block with 2 bolt holes for my starter, because in drag racing, everything's SFI in this area. You can't just go trying to bolt the starter somewhere else. And looking at the tag, the red tags are a failure tag. The yellow tags are known good part. It tells you what's wrong with it. A lot of them had, you know, a nick in a cylinder or damage, and I didn't want to deal with that. Rusty sounds pretty good to me. If that's all they found wrong with it, that thing's ready to go. And I'll give you a tour around it before I hang up, but it has, in the camshaft bore, has roller bearings, probably 55 millimeter. I haven't measured them. And I have a cam. You could have it reground, but this one was just replaced because it was upgraded, it says, on ARCA control engine number 152. All my parts have came off different engines. It doesn't matter to me, but I'm gonna have to measure it myself, determine what the specs are. From what I understand, it is a hydraulic roller, so that wouldn't be the end of the world. I have some tie bar hydraulic roller lifters, so again, dreaming of putting it together. I do have the double roller timing chain. But again, the stuff is exotic-ish. It's, you know, not your typical don't measure a thing, gun it together LS build, because the connecting rods are Honda pin end. The big end of the rod is Honda, and the small end's 866, which is small. I do have the wrist pins, so the crankshaft is 362 stroke and a 4185 bore. That's a pretty decent big bore short stroke motor. But the crankshaft was, I believe, a Cali's. These rods are Cali's. And their goal, these motors are so overbuilt, they didn't want to have a lot of failures. They wanted them to run and then just replace the components, normal wear items. So the crankshaft, if I was to try to build it in its current condition, back to what it was, the crankshaft's going to be odd, the pistons are going to be odd. They had a 12-to-1-ish compression rule. That's a little higher than I really want, but if I happen to stumble across a set of Ilmor pistons, that'd be okay. I had to stop and sneeze. I have two bags of LS7 style rocker rounds if I was to luck into a set of those 12-degree heads along with billet stands. I have the special valley cover, I have a dry sump pan, which is absolutely nothing wrong with it, from engine number 54. He had a bunch of steel ones and a bunch of aluminum ones, and the steel one weighed about the same and obviously easier to repair. I have the complete engine wiring harness with coils. Again, I had this big round plug that screws off and on that would just plug into the firewall. I don't, other than the coils, don't know how useful any of that stuff's going to be. But I was just excited to get a block. The block seems to be standard LS style main bearings, which is good. The closer we can come to normal LS stuff, the happier I'm going to be. It has to be a dry sump, or at least an external oil pump. There's no provisions for the traditional LS style oil pump, which is why I was interested in the GM Performance block, because at least the holes were there. You may have to bore out some passages or make it work. We're going to find out on Charlie's motor, but there was no GM Performance blocks left. There was 4 of them sitting there on a pallet, and they only had one starter bolt apiece. So that was not going to do me any good. So if I am to build this, it's definitely going to have an external oil pump, which has a lot of benefits other than the cost. The deck height seems to be 9,240-ish. I haven't measured it exactly, but just eyeballing it. So that's regular LS stuff. That's cool. It has, hang on, let me turn you around. Well, I guess we'll start from this angle. If you study the DOT LS Next series of blocks, this may not be an LS Next, there's different names for it. They have traditional Chevy style or 4-volt main caps in all positions, splayed on the middle 3. But these blocks still have the skirt. A lot of the DOT blocks don't run the skirt. You have to run an adapter if you want to run an LS style oil pan. This seems to be, well, it matches my dry sump pan anyway, so it may or may not take a stock pan. A stock pan's not going to do me any good. The exciting part, for me anyway, is it has the extra cylinder head bolts. It's called a 6-bolt block instead of a 4. Your normal LS motor basically has 4 bolts around each cylinder. And when you start applying a lot of boost, head gasket problems, well, it becomes an issue sealing them. So this has threaded holes here and an open hole here. There'd be a nut and a bolt down through the cylinder head. Plus you have the normal row of clamping on this particular engine. These are metric. These are 7/16 course. 1/2 inch was an option, and it could be, you could bore them out, but I think with the 18-bolt head, even with the 7/16 ARP type stud, that's a dramatic improvement over a stock style LS, and there's a lot of aftermarket LS heads in both LS 1, 3, and 7, and you can buy a different style of heads, but they all have the extra boss hanging off the head for the extra clamping ability of an aftermarket block. I have the valley cover. It's interesting because oil pressure comes up through the valley cover. There's a little stand. They must have had a sender, plus there's another, maybe a gauge fitting on the side, and that's actually has live pressure. This looks like it would be on a stock block. It's a GM number, but it does pass oil right there, so I have it. That's good. I'm going to pull out a set of lifters just to see if they fit the bore. Again, I have no idea what the specs on the camshaft are, but I bet it's potentially usable. I don't know what the lobe separation is. I don't know anything about it. That remains to be seen. If you happen to be an Ilmor engineering expert, I'd love to know the specs on the cam. And of all the parts that were in this warehouse, there's no crankshafts, there's no pistons. So that's odd. I've looked on eBay and stuff, haven't seen any yet, but this stuff getting leaked out to the public, it's only been in existence for what, 8 or 9 years, so I'm sure as time, they don't build that many of them. If there's only 300 or 400 in existence at this point, again, they celebrated the 200th engine I'm guessing maybe there's double that now, but they're not exactly popular. But when you go shopping on eBay and stuff, the R07 engines and stuff, there's a lot of reasonably priced parts for those. But you know they use the best of everything. That connecting rod, that Carrillo connecting rod, depending on which ones you look at, I mean, they're rated for 9,500 RPM and 2,000 horsepower. So that's nutty. They look perfect. Of course, you'd have to measure them and all that stuff. But again, you have to remember you're not building a $40,000 race engine if you're just a low buck LS guy. So that is kind of exciting. But this whole mess took place Saturday morning inside of probably 5 minutes. I was on my way to go make a deal. I traded off a manual transmission that I had no use for, and got a bunch of junk that I might have no use for, but it's different and interesting anyway. So I bet over time I'll find a use for it. I mentioned the bore is already at 4.185 inches. Fortunately or unfortunately, when you look at big bore kits or balanced rotator kits for an LS motor, that is the maximum you'll find without having to have a custom piston made. I saw one of these all done for sale that was now at, I think, 4,190. So they went just big enough to do something with it. I think if I had a set of 4,185 pistons, I'm going to measure before I order anything, but if it was a little on the loose side, they got like the line-to-line coat. They have a coating now that they actually spray it on kind of thick, and it clearances itself, believe it or not, and then it stays there. So made just for this purpose. That, and it's an anti-wear. It's all the latest rage apparently. So who knows what kind of mess I've got myself in, but hey, I love junk, and here it is. So once again, if you're a Ilmor 396 aficionado, contact me. We'll talk. Have a great day. Take care.